In the 2022 F1 season, the wheel-to-wheel battles that Charles Leclerc had with Max Verstappen were less aggressive than the Red Bull drivers' tussles with Lewis Hamilton in 2021. What does Leclerc think of his rivalry with Verstappen? Stay tuned to find out. Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen enjoyed a series of close fights as the pair traded wins at the start of the season. However, despite its intensity, the on-track battles that took place between the two drivers were always clean. The Dutchman claimed his maiden F1 world title in spectacular and controversial fashion last year, piping Hamilton to the crown on the final lap of the final race in Abu Dhabi as the championship went right down to the wire. Last year, Verstappen was in a career-defining fight for the World Championship for the first time after 6 seasons in cars that were not of a title-contending caliber. He was doing so against the combined colossi of Mercedes and Hamilton, which has served as the gold standard for a significant number of years. Verstappen appeared to be putting down a marker for Hamilton in order to gain the psychological advantage that he would always win in a 50-50 situation, and that he was even willing to crash rather than give away. Even though Verstappen had been racing in Formula 1 for 6 years at the time, and even though there had been times when he and Hamilton had crossed paths, it had never been over anything that truly mattered. Hamilton had admitted that he wasn't quite sure how to handle Max's aggressive close-up and had figured the best way was just to give him space. Back then, Hamilton could afford to lose out in the odd fight for track space because he had a superior car and the title wasn't on the line. But when engaged head-to-head in a title contest, the dynamics obviously changed, and at some point, Hamilton responded. Last year was the first year Hamilton and Verstappen properly felt each other out on equal terms. We saw both drivers engage in furious battles, which resulted in collisions on track, but the 2022 F1 season was entirely different. While Hamilton and Mercedes struggled to compete against Verstappen and Red Bull in the just concluded Formula 1 season, Ferrari Charles Leclerc emerged as the biggest threat to Verstappen's title defense. The relationship between Verstappen's team and Ferrari appeared far more amicable in comparison to last year's Red Bull's rivalry with Mercedes. You're enjoying this video, right? You definitely don't want to miss out on other amazing videos. So all you have to do is hit the subscription button. It's that easy. Thanks for doing that. Let's move on. Verstappen and Leclerc have been going wheel to wheel right back to their karting days as kids. On the track, they are quite familiar with one another and have even begun to develop a relationship of sorts with one another. They have competed against one another for a very long time and are able to read one another extremely well. They first competed against one another in karting in the year 2010, and they didn't meet in car racing until Leclerc graduated to F1 with Sauber in 2018. Given that Leclerc never encountered Verstappen on track on equal terms during his rookie season, the competition between the two drivers didn't heat up in cars until 2019. The first major incident of the season occurred in Austria, in the midst of the season, with Leclerc driving a front-running Ferrari at the time. Leclerc led the majority of the race, but Verstappen, who had fallen back to 9th place after getting off to a poor start, was closing in and made his move at the hairpin with 2.5 laps to go. Leclerc left the door open, an invitation Verstappen accepted, and then Leclerc found himself crowded off the track. The stewards did not take any action, but Leclerc showed that he was a quick learner by paying back the favour at Silverstone the next race. There, he showed he was willing to use Verstappen's tactics with some late defensive moves and a willingness to show him the grass. At first, he was doing this for defence, but after getting past in the pits, he capitalised on Verstappen's inability to get his tyres hot enough to pass him on the Wellington straight. Verstappen then came back at him, complaining about Leclerc moving too late in defence, but ultimately he jumped ahead at the next round of pit stops. They later ran side by side through Copse before the battle was ultimately settled in Leclerc's favour when he crowded Verstappen off the track at Club. Leclerc stuck to his give no quarter guns in battle with Verstappen at the 2019 Japanese Grand Prix when the pair made contact at turn 2 on the first lap, and Verstappen spun. Leclerc also picked up front wing damage in the clash. For all that he has a reputation for zero compromise, Verstappen actually races according to the situation. Last year, when he ran Hamilton off at Brazil turn 4, after the Briton was already ahead, it was done in the context of the Mercedes being, at that point in the season, much the faster car. It looked feasible that Hamilton would win all the remaining races after the big step made between Mexico and Brazil, and Verstappen was running out of ways of preventing that. That action exhibited a sense of desperation since he was facing the possibility of losing the world title that he had dreamed of winning. However, that wasn't the case in the 2022 F1 season. This desperation was not present, which is something that he alluded to in Jeddah when he said last year when, as a little kid, you always dream of course, trying to be a Formula 1 driver, and hopefully one day you win a championship, But that's achieved, that kind of pressure of wanting and needing to do that is gone, but you still want to win races and stuff. When Leclerc was asked why his on-track warfare on the 2022 season with Verstappen was less dramatic than between the latter and Hamilton, Leclerc pointed to the circumstances in which his fights with his Red Bull opponent took place. Leclerc said, "We know each other very well, but I don't think that is the reason why it's quieter between us. I think the difference with Max versus Lewis from last year is that we were at different points in the season. Our duels were at the beginning of the year. After that, either I had a big lead in the championship or Max was way ahead. You don't take as many risks, so it was more because of the nature of the championship." However, Leclerc conceded that if stakes are high, such as in a showdown at the conclusion of the season, then the bickering is likely to become more heated. The Monegasque added, "If we fight to the end in 2023, I think it would be a tougher race." Leclerc then proceeded to talk about the fierce duel at Spielberg and Silverstone in 2019. The Ferrari Charger came out of the losing end in Austria, but they were victorious in their fight in Britain. It was perhaps an episode from which both drivers learned a lesson from each other. Leclerc said, "I hated the outcome of Austria. I thought you couldn't drive like that, but when the stewards told me it was allowed, I was the first to welcome that approach. I like to fight hard on the track, at the limit. That's how I like racing. Hopefully, we will see such duels in the future." However, according to Verstappen, there is a distinct difference between this year's rivalry and last year's rivalry with Hamilton, and it has nothing to do with the men driving the cars. Instead, he asserted that there has always been respect between himself and Hamilton, but last season, it was their respective teams that occasionally overstepped the mark, whereas in 2022, things were much more cordial between Red Bull and Ferrari. Verstappen said, "I don't think necessarily it was between the drivers. It was mainly because it's a completely different approach between the teams last year and this year. And probably there was a bit more respect between the two teams as well as this year. I think that helps us a lot for sure. And I've known Charles for a long time because we basically grew up together throughout the racing and go-karting and all the way to Formula One. But I always had and still have a lot of respect for Lewis, and we always got on well. And also today, as racing drivers, you come together, but you also very quickly forget and just move on." In fact, ahead of the recent Hungarian Grand Prix, the Red Bull racer admitted he prefers his battles with Leclerc and his Ferrari team over his tussles with Hamilton and Mercedes. Speaking to Sky Italy, Verstappen said, "I prefer what we have now because, first of all, Charles I know very well. He's a nice guy. I think also we are fighting a very well-respected competitor in terms of Ferrari. The way they go about the way we are fighting, when they win a race, we can go to them and say well done, and when we win a race, they can say well done, and I really respect that." Even with what Verstappen said, we won't be surprised to see the Leclerc-Verstappen rivalry become much more heated in the years to come. What's your thought about Verstappen and Leclerc's rivalry? Could the rivalry escalate between the two drivers in the coming years? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. That will be all for today's video. Thanks for staying tuned. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so that you can always get to watch more amazing videos like this. See you in the next video.